Now that the creature's UV'd and we're getting ready to polypaint the model, I decided to take a few screen grabs of renders of the Rockgrubber and bring it into Photoshop. Now, what I like to do is play around with a few color schemes before working in Polypaint, just like doing a sketch before working in ZBrush. This helps me to get a game plan and move forward as quickly as possible. So along with grabbing the renders, I also grabbed some flat material renders of the Rockgrubber as well, and that's one of the default options in the material palette. It's a great way to create a fast mask for the character. It enables me to quickly color options without getting too messy and create masks. So using Photoshop, I'm able to quickly colorize the creature using color layers, darken layers, and soft light layers, which we'll be getting more into as we move into Photoshop after the renders are done in KeyShot. You can quickly adjust the hue and saturation, the overall temperature of the creature, and just come up with a few options because it's not that time consuming in Photoshop. And so once you have a plan and maybe once you've shown the client a few options, he can pick a color scheme that he likes and then you can start poly painting. Alright, so we're ready to start painting. Before getting into poly painting, I just want to prepare my material a bit. There's an excellent new feature, it's relatively new, feature in the materials palette called the wax modifier. And what it does is creates the illusion of subsurface scattering. So it's almost as if light is passing through skin, illuminating capillaries. So you can see when Best Preview Renderer is on, it's starting to heat up in a few areas in the model, but only when Best Preview is on. And so in order to keep that constant, we're going to go undo Render Properties, and we're going to leave the Wax Preview button. We're going to hit Wax Preview. As you can see now, the material has a warm hue to it. So this is something that I want the model to have because I intend to render it in other programs using a skin-like material that it will be a bit similar to this. So this will be my base. Now that I'm ready to start painting, you're going to want to go into your subtool palette. You want to make sure that the paint brush is active. Good to go. It's a little bright. Let's see if we can just dial this down a little bit. We're going to turn Z add off. We're going to be doing all of our painting with the standard brush. So we're going to go to RGB. Let's turn Z add off. And I would like the base to be one solid color. So to begin with, I'm going to play around with my little palette here. And let's add some yellow. This is a great way to mix color. It reminds me a lot of the Photoshop Magic Picker. So let's go into Color and Fill Object. Now you can see that it is the color that I've selected. This will be our base. And I want to get all of the little cracks, all of the little details. I want to add some shadows to that to help enhance them. And this reminds me of something that I used to do with my maquettes when I was working in clay. And I would paint my model in a darker, slightly darker base, and then I would dry brush a lighter color over the top of it to get all of these wonderful details. So I'm going to go into masking, and I'm going to go to Mask by Cavity. So I'm going to hit Mask by Cavity, and I'm going to invert that mask, and the majority of it will be darker, and I'm going to pick a darker value. And I'm just going to paint over the model. I could go a little darker than that. Again, there's a lot of geometry here to work with, but I want to make sure I get all of that detail going. There we go. I especially want it in the back, knowing that this area is going to get significantly darker than the chest. So let's clear the mask. zoom in. So you can see that now the darker color has settled into all of the cracks. There we go. So we've got a nice bit of depth here. I'm going to start to darken up areas like the eyes. I'm going to start to sneak up on this on these value changes. I'm going to heat it up a little later. But what we want to do is we want to gradually paint our creature in layers. You want to make sure that everything is unified before we start to separate the colors up a bit. I know that these mandibles, I want these to get darker as we work. I think Lazy Mouse is on. Let's turn that off. There we go. Alright. Not bad. We've got a good base going. Let's work on the pattern on the top of the head. Now, when thinking about this, I was thinking about animals that are a bit more small. You'll notice that smaller animals tend to have more pushed patterns, like tropical frogs, fish, insects. And as you get larger, the color schemes on animals tend to simplify quite a bit. There are a few exceptions. Of course, giraffe has a lot of breakup, but for the most part, animals that are large tend to be very simple in color. And so I'm just going to get the back of this creature nice and dark. I like these mustard yellows. This is a good base. I'm getting a little distracted by the specularity, and so I'm going to go into material, and I'm just going to dial that down a bit. Can't really see the forest through the trees here. Let's go to specular, dial that back. There it is, nice and matte. I want to see true color. So in working on the color scheme of a creature, it's nice to have a few things in mind. Now there are a lot of creatures in nature that have a darker top and a lighter bottom. Animals like frogs, for example, a tortoise shell. It's always a lighter underbelly. In a lot of animals that have armor, the belly is quite vulnerable, and the top of the creature is plated. So with animals like, let's say, an armadillo, the top of them is what's most susceptible to predators. And so that's plated. That tends to be a little darker, blends in with the ground, but their underbellies are a bit light, a bit vulnerable. So the material is significantly weaker. So I'm going in and I am transitioning my color scheme, my pattern, just by using some breakup, some dots. And with symmetry on, this goes pretty fast. So I'm really starting to like this pattern. Let's say I do something that I'm not crazy about. I can hit C, and that helps me to color pick. So I can start to break away these lines with little dots and make it feel like a really solid pattern. I might eat away at this, just breaking it up. And painting, like texture, is about layering. So right now we're working with a lot of mustard colors, a lot of yellows in here. And we're going to start to add some reds a little later. But I just want it to feel right before I move on. Let's lay in the rest of the dark pattern. let's get that underbelly a little lighter. And you can actually do quite a bit of mixing on the model by lowering the intensity, just kind of glazing with color, cooling things off. Actually, let's heat that up like that. Yeah. As I hit C, I'm sampling different areas I've painted. Let's diffuse this a bit. Again, I want that warmer underbelly, and I think I want some warmer color in the face as well. Get some of these yellows out of here. Eventually, we'll be bringing in quite a few of the alphas in the paint. It's going to help to add some great texture and patterns. And come in, add some pinks. And it's very easy to just dial down my palette. So I can very quickly hit C, sample the warm value, and start to paint the inside of the mouth. Let's get in here. I want this nasal cavity to really heat up. So I'm really taking advantage now of the poly groups that are still in the model. And just like with the rest of the design, the color patterns that I establish in the head are going to help me to figure out the rest of the scheme for the body. Bring that back in. Now, there are a lot of colors in skin, and so I'd like to bring in a few blues here and there, especially to highlight some of these veins in the head. I want him to be pale, and I'd like to see some severe contrast between the pale portion of the head and the dark patterning. Now the eyes are distracting me a bit, and so I haven't painted those yet. So I'm just going to go to quick save, and I'm just going to hit those eyes with black right now. Just going to go to straight black. It's really starting to feel like a vulture. Maybe we'll get some cooler, pale colors. So there's still a bit of mixing and exploration when working. Going to heat up the underside here. It's just layers and layers. Let's heat up the chest. And I want to break up that surface. There we go. Let's speed this up a bit. As you can see as I'm working, I'm heating up the chest while using different brush tips just to break up the surface. Now this can be a bit time consuming, so I'm glad we're speeding things up a bit. At this point, I'm changing the palette up a bit. You can see there are a lot more pinks now, starting to take over the yellows. And I'll be reworking the pattern on the back and on the head quite a bit. Now that I have my palette established, I'm going to start darkening up a few areas in the plates, just so that they grab more attention. And I want to figure out how these plates break up, and also how the dark pattern breaks up into the lighter skin tone. And so I'm choosing kind of like a frog pattern. Everything in nature occurs gradually, whether we're talking about transitions in skin temperature or patterns. Here we go, just breaking up the legs a bit, really starting to feel very frog-like. And because the design is fairly simple, I feel like pushing the detail of the color scheme will really complement it. I'm even doing a little bit of contouring for the muscles. You'll notice I added a warmer, darker hue to the inside of the leg. At this point when I'm working, I like to just get into a zone. I listen to some music, watch some cartoons in my reference monitors. Starting to add a few lighter values here. A lot of breakup. Now, all the techniques that I'm using right now, I've picked up by watching artists in practical effects houses using airbrushes, painting the real thing, painting puppets, foam latex, silicone puppets, makeup appliances. And the technique is fairly similar. You can see a little bit of contouring in the rib cage, getting my highlights. Just enhancing the detail with paint. This reminds me of a very prominent example in creature effects with regards to painting. Alien and Predator are brought up over and over again in the industry, and there's a very good reason for that. The Predator is a very simple sculpt. The character is pretty much just a human being, and the paint scheme complements him quite a bit. You'll notice he has a lot of breakup to keep the design interesting, whereas Alien has a very complicated sculpting theme. And the color scheme is very simple to complement the sculpt as well. Here I'm breaking up the pattern even further. It's all about how forms transition in creature design. Adding some highlights, calling attention to the plates. At this stage I noticed that there's not enough form in the top of the head, and so I quickly turned on Z-Add and used standard to add a crest to the skull. I really enjoy being able to just select areas of the sculpt and isolate them. It allows me to really concentrate. More contouring in the muscles, more breakup of the pattern. Really enjoying the highlights around the plates. And you can see there's a lot of back and forth here. More muscle contouring here. Just doing it with a darker value. Highlighting anatomy. And just because it's sculpted and you're in painting doesn't mean the responsibility to enhance the sculpt is gone. At this stage, I'm working with the drag rectangle, and I'm dragging alphas across the surface. You can get a lot of incredible breakup this way, and I do it quite a bit. First, I always like to see how far I can go just with the standard brush, but you see the dots, the veins that I'm using are really helping me to break up the surface. And as I've mentioned before, sculpting, painting, when it comes to organic creatures, it's all about layering. You can come up with some incredible patterns just by manipulating these alphas. And just like with sculpting, you can apply texture very harshly and then smooth it down. Same thing with paint. You can boldly paint in your surface and then use the creature's local color to knock it back, to knock back that contrast. Really enjoying the complexity. So the drag rectangle is being utilized quite a bit here, and it's nice, it's random. Um, Oftentimes when working with this tool, the first time I drag it down, it will not have the right contrast that I want. It won't be as bold as I want. And as I mentioned before, if you hit the 1 key, the very last stage is repeated. And so I can use that to enhance the opacity of the marks made by the drag rectangle. Doing a lot of fine tuning. I want to be able to get quite a few close-ups. Here I'm enhancing the teeth, the little barbs at the end of the mandibles, the thorns. You see there's a lot of back and forth here. More breakup in the arm. If you look at real creatures, there's really no solid color. There's a lot of layers, there's a lot of transitions, and I'm trying to accomplish that here. Doing some vein work in the arms. I'm spending a lot of time breaking up the transition from the dark green to the pink underbelly. It's also helping to make the creature appear larger than, let's say, a tree frog. You notice that smaller animals, the transitions between patterns are a bit more severe. As we get larger, things slowly transition from one pattern to the next, from thick hair to thin hair. And so by adding this level of detail, I'm indicating the creature's scale. So everything is really related in the design of a creature, whether it's the anatomy or the paint scheme. more plate breakup. Notice I'm adding highlights between the plates to enhance them, to separate them. I really enjoy polypainting. It can be very fast. And as I've mentioned before, a lot of my mixing is just happening right on the model. Being able to sample color just by holding down C. Here I'm breaking up the joints a bit. I'm having the color scheme resemble a wrinkle pattern. There's a pattern in concept art, in illustration, and that is sneaking up on your final image by gradually working over the entire model. You can spend time resolving it, as well as giving yourself time to simply come up with new ideas. If you're struggling with one area of the paint scheme or the sculpt, move on to another. Give your brain a chance to come up with more options. Here I'm adding now the darkest spots on the creature. It's going to be in the shoulders here. It's very dark green. Darkening up the plates. Making sure that that pattern is consistent. Remember, if it's going to show up in one area, it's best to repeat it. A bit more modeling, a bit more vein work. I'm starting to focus on that red core, having it continue through the tail. Probably going to knock that back. Really liking what that third value is doing to the design. Okay, I'm going to enhance a few of these details, some of the veins. You'll notice as I'm working, I tend to hit BPR every now and then. It's just another way of seeing the model. I want this to look good in ZBrush as well as other 3D programs, so oftentimes as I work I just hit BPR just to give it a nice check. There we go. Yeah, the veins are one of those things that creep me out personally. Darkening the toes. That's looking pretty good.